Welcome to episode 6 of the Carlson Cards podcast, where my name is Austin. I interview longtime collectors to learn more about their strategies and ways they've gone about navigating the hobby and ultimately growing a really freaking cool collection. So, the collector we get a chance to interview today is a very interesting person. So, his name is Adam. I've chatted with Adam for a while on Instagram. We have a few things in common. We both have a huge interest in personal finance, and also we both really enjoy collecting Peyton Manning. Now, Adam does dive into his other collecting, including vintage baseball, in this episode. But the main takeaway that I had was our discussion when it came to personal finance and navigating the hobby, and also talking about the idea of prospecting versus Hall of Fame type of players in terms of collecting. And part of the reason I wanted to bring Adam on is because I know he has a very good perspective on this whole thing. He's been the prospector, he came in, was buying into breaks, and now he's really shifted into being more of a Hall of Fame type collector that's really stuck around for decades here. Not to mention the fact that football is just around the corner. I know it's a few months away, but we're all going to be hit with that hobby hype machine in just a few short months. We're going to be seeing young prospect quarterbacks all over our Instagram feeds, all over our YouTube screen. So I figured it was the perfect time to discuss this before that hype hits. So I hope you guys enjoy. Let's kick it over to the interview. Okay, welcome everyone to episode 6 of the Carlson Cards podcast. I'm joined today by a friend that I've met through Instagram. We share many things in common that we're going to be chatting about today. His name's Adam. He goes by Adam_McNany Cards on Instagram. So if you don't follow him, be sure to do that if you haven't already. And first of all, obviously, Adam, how are you doing? And thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm doing well, Austin. I appreciate you having me on here. I've only done the one other one with Brett, so still a little raw doing these.
It's good. It comes from the heart. Then there's no preparation. It's just straight from the heart.
Exactly, for the most part.
And so it's funny you mentioned already that talk with Brett. So I remember I was just chatting with you before this, vividly listening to your episode with Brett. It was like last year in August, maybe something like that, if I remember the date right.
It was just post-national. Yeah, we talked about a little bit of everything on there.
My favorite thing I remember was the new players versus the old players. So I think I told you already that's something I want to talk about, especially as football is still quiet. But we're 2 months or a month away from football being super hyped up. So one of the big reasons I wanted you is I felt like you had a lot of expertise in that area and you are able to explain it well. So I'd love to obviously touch on that as we get going here. But one thing I want to start with, Adam. So the way I kind of connected with you, we're in the same group chat. Then I also saw when I went on your page that you have a hashtag financial independence retire early. And that's short for FIRE. When I saw that, I immediately was like, no way, cut from the same cloth. So I was obsessed with, that whole thing for a long time before college and during. So I was wondering if you could give like a high level of what that is, what it means to you, and maybe, why you lead with that from your page. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that?
Sure. So as you mentioned, FIRE, financial independence, retire early, or some people, just use the FI side of it, financial independence. It's essentially a community of like-minded people that, their goal is to achieve financial independence, and in some cases, early retirement outside of, the traditional retiring at 62 or 65, Social Security, that type of thing. So, the group, they operate in all types of different levels, which is similar to, the sports card industry. But it's typically, controlled finances, high savings rates, because, ultimately you want to get to that point where, you can pull the plug, whether, there are people in there that do it in their 30s or their 40s, or, maybe like myself, I'm looking at, potentially mid 50s. And it's really just that option there, right? It's having choices in life to, essentially pull the plug if I want to, and take a chance, and maybe, not retire, but, take on a different, maybe passion project, side hustle, that type of thing. So it really intrigued me. I've been looking into it or doing it for about the last 6 years. I just one day decided to Google how to retire early. And as I preface that, I was big into Dave Ramsey, but that's, to me, more like graduating from high school. He's very specific and very rigid, whereas, the FI community is more, broad based. And that's why, like I said, I liken it to sports card collecting. So, for the last several years, I've been really focused on that. And it kind of lined up as well. So back in 2017, I was not in the hobby. I was on the periphery. I'd always follow things, whether on the blowout forums or those type of things. But when I got back in the hobby in 2019, it did take a little bit for me to make that adjustment and spend money on sports cards. When I had my family, I got my wife on board, which took a lot. But being able to make that transition out of that into sports cards, because prior to that, my sports card history was probably a bit crazy, or the polar opposite.
So when you say you've been doing it for 6 years, can you elaborate what the doing it means in a high level? I know, again, I'm pretty
Yeah,
familiar, but I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who aren't. And I'd love when we wrap this part up to connect to the cards and what kind of has led you, to the cards and the knowledge you've taken away from this movement as well, and how that's helped you collect.
sure. So a lot of it was, doing research. Mr. Money Mustache is probably one of the better known ones. So going on to the forums that he has, and researching and reading. Bogleheads, Jack Bogle, who is known as the godfather of index funds. He founded Vanguard, reading into his information, but then listening to a lot of podcasts. So, a lot of different materials, a lot of different advice. And so from there, it was changing how I looked at retirement, where, maybe 15 to percent was considered good as far as what you're investing in, and really increasing that, trying to max out, whether it's 401ks or health savings accounts, and IRAs, those type of things, building those different retirement buckets there. But a lot of research, no different than going back to sports cards, researching the different areas within the hobby, and finding out what would make the most sense. But yeah, a lot of time taken, figuring out, for me, it's doing index funds. So those are, I would align them to veteran or vintage collecting, where it's, not going to be your highs of highs and lows of lows. Basically an index fund, like I do the S&P 500, or a total market index fund, like in the S&P, it tracks the 500 top funds, top companies, and that can always move in and out, who is in and outside of that 500. But doesn't do anything crazy over history. I want to say it's like 10 or 11%. The total market's like 2 to 3,000 companies, so it's just very balanced within it, versus chasing single stocks or penny stocks, which would be more of your second or third or fourth tier
Is
prospects.
that the Trey Lance? Is that what you're saying? The penny stocks?
Trey would be, yeah, he's like that hot tech stock, and definitely a lot of risk and reward. And I've been down that path many times way back in the day. Even when I started back into collecting, I kind of went back to some of those roots as far as prospecting and things like that, when I got back into it. But
Yeah, thanks for giving a high level there. The reason I want to ask that is because, I've kind of realized as I started collecting, and, it sounds like your journey's been an evolution as well. It was kind of like when I got the finances under control in terms of the hobby, man, it was a lot more fun. It was like, okay, we're not going to buy every card we see. It's going to be, $100 a month or 200 or whatever my wife and I were happy with. So I was going to ask, like, have you felt like that's been helpful as well? Like, especially if you had kind of been in the hobby prior, now you're into it and kind of really feel like you have your personal finances under control. Have you been able to enjoy it more? What's kind of been the difference there?
it has been. So when I started back in, like I said, 2019, and the reason why I got into it is, so my son was never really into sports cards. He's 22 now. He just graduated from college, but he was into Funkos. So I knew nothing about him, got into him with them, and that kind of opened up, interest in sports cards again. I have a buddy. We've gone to the national last couple of years. We're going, again with another group of people, for this one. But he was starting to get back into cards because I had talked to him about it. He was asking me questions about Bowman Chrome and different things like that. So the conversations with him, and then my son in collecting got me, looking back into sports cards. And so the first guy I bought, going back to my prospecting, was Mike Soroka, who pitches for the Atlanta Braves. Good start to everything. Unfortunately, if people aren't familiar with him, great year in 2019, 2020, ended up tearing his Achilles. I think it was 2020. Yeah, it was a COVID year. Then tore it again the next year, just a freak accident. And now he actually is back, and he pitched. He's had a couple starts. He pitched against Oakland, and he pitched against or not the Cardinals, the Diamondbacks the other night. But he did get sent back down to Gwinnett. So, that's where I started. Because that's the roots that I had. And then a little bit further on in 2019, I started, prospecting in basketball players. So buying guys that I liked, which, I like big men, which doesn't go with the hobby, because I'm, for me, back when I played basketball in high school, I was 6'4". So I was considered, I had to play center, even though I, wanted to play guard and chuck threes and all that. But I bought guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid. I'm a Kansas fan, so I really like Joel and a bunch of other guys. But it took a lot for me to start going in and making those purchases because of the whole FI thing. I had been very particular with what I bought and what I sold, and putting all my money into investments and essentially trying to build the money tree out in the backyard for my future self and my future, my wife and us, our future selves out there. But during that time, I kind of, in 2019, I did buy a Hank Aaron rookie. That was always a card, on my wish list. And I bought a PSA 3 at the time. So it was breaking out of that mold. It did take a lot of, it took a change in thinking and mentality, just because I had gotten so ingrained and entrenched in, into the whole, FI space there.
So one of the books I've read, and maybe you've read it as well, I think it's by Ramit Sethi. I think I said that name horribly wrong. But he is now as a show on Netflix. One
Yeah.
of the things I liked about that book was he really detailed out, and this clicked with me really well versus like the Dave Ramsey mindset of, figure out what you enjoy spending money on and then spend, quote unquote, lavishly in that space. Is that kind of what your story was? Like you identified, okay, I'm into this hobby, so maybe I'm not going to go buy a brand new car, but I am going to go buy a Hank Aaron rookie. Like, is that your Mercedes, Adam? Is that what you're doing here?
So it is kind of crazy because my wife, like, she's gotten on board even with the card piece because it's kind of turned into, its own, I don't want to call it business or a side hustle or anything, because I'm more of what I would call a lazy seller. I have things that I bought at shows over the years, the few times I set up with the intent of moving, because I figured I had to have that in the mix of things, and I still own those cards, and they've gotten just pummeled just because I don't do the shows. But yeah, I've probably, people that know me, when I tell them, like, my brother-in-law, when I tell him, like, hey, this is what I spent on a 51 Bowen Mantle, and he has sports cards from when he was a kid, I think it's kind of eye-opening because he knows that I'm not like I don't spend a lot of money. I would say my vices or sports cards, and then of all things, which is going to be completely against the whole FI, I do like to play poker and blackjack, so those are like the two vices. Outside of that, I don't really like to spend money. But yeah, it opened things up. I would say 2020 is when I got more comfortable. The biggest purchase I had made at the time, and it took me way out of my comfort zone, is I bought a PSA 10. It was a 2003 SP Signature Michael Jordan auto. By far, like, more than I had spent on any single card. And mind you, I hadn't sold any cards by that point either. So all the stuff I was buying, the Sorokas and all the Prism, stuff, I hadn't even moved at that point. But buying that Jordan kind of opened things up to where then I bought, the Peyton Manning 98 Bowman's Best Atomic Refractor, the PSA 10 at that, because going back a little bit, I should say the shift went from prospects to buying cards that I wanted. That was where I figured out, okay, I'm not enjoying this because, as I mentioned in Brett's podcast, it reminded me of like dealing with fantasy sports. And I truly do not like to follow players that I don't really care too much about. I mean, so outside of like Joel Embiid, well, AD when he came to the Lakers, that was, a little bit different there. But for the most part, I didn't care about them, and I felt like I had to watch check ESPN every morning to see, hey, how did these guys do, because the market was fluctuating so much. So I decided to pivot, and started buying a little bit of vintage that summer. Bought the Jordan, started buying Peyton Manning because Peyton's just been kind of a guy that I've followed. We're essentially the same age. I'm just like 8 or 9 months older maybe. But I went into that direction, and so yeah, I did require opening the pocket book a little more, but I was in a better financial space as well. I had taken a lot of time and effort to build the base from like an investing standpoint. So and this is where I'll liken it, the investing to sports cards, right? Is a lot of people want the instant gratification, get 0 to 100 and not necessarily put in the work. But for both sports cards, I mean, unless you have unlimited funds and investing, it takes a lot to build that initial base, right? And investing, they say your first 100,000 that you have in retirement funds is the hardest, and it's true. And then from there, uh, interest and dividends and growth start taking over to the point where it's you're going to eventually get to that point where you're seeing more in growth than you are from what you're contributing. And I liken that to sports cards because a lot of people have similar stories where they started out maybe hustling lower end cards and kind of built that up to get to where they are today. So I took some of those similar mindsets, and always had just a separate side of money. I mean, for me, sports cards, yeah, there's an investment piece into it. I certainly don't want them to go to zero. I think that would make me really sad. But they're also like more of an alternative asset where they represent a small amount of, I would say of net worth, just, because I don't buy and sell them. They're a lot different than, dealing in the investments that I deal with, that I just, in that case, I just, sock money away and I check it every day, but there's no intent of doing anything with it. And there's no emotional attachment either. When it comes to that day of selling that stuff, that's not going to be a problem.
Peyton will be harder to sell than the S&P, that's for sure.
It will be. Yeah. There are cards that I have sold and instantly, regretted over the last couple of years. I sold a PSA 4.5, 52 Mays, a Culture Collision, here in Atlanta, not this year's, but last year's. And then like 2 months later, I bought another PSA 4.5, 52 Mays, and I paid significantly more than what I sold mine for. And it was just like, I wanted the card. So I'm not the best at buying and selling sports cards. I got lucky like everybody else did, if you were doing this in 2019 and early 2020, right? It was kind of hard not to, to see some, profits from things. And I just moved that into a lot of what you see on my Instagram page. So that's kind of the story there.
Awesome. So a lot to unpack there. There's a few things. So you misquoted yourself. The quote was, "I don't want to care about players I don't care about." That's
Yeah,
I vividly remember that.
it is. Yeah, and it was honest. I mean, it was just something I thought of right on the spot. And I don't play fantasy. I hate fantasy sports. I used to play them, and I literally do not like it.
So one of the other things too, and you likened it to investments, and I think it's super accurate. So again, very similar for me, where came in was spending money again, prospecting, kind of growing my base in the sense of I caught on to the grading and really enjoyed that, and that was kind of my thing. It's not for everybody, but I really enjoyed growing an eBay store on the side, buying stuff, grading it, starting with the 10 card orders that I could afford. Moved to the 20, then the 50. Now this last week I sent out a 1,000 card order. Don't ask me how. It was like absurd, months of preparation. But moral of the story there is I
emphasize, I appreciate you sharing like the realness to all this. So I think a lot of times you see pages like yourself, and I just assume, everyone assumes, oh, this guy must be rich, right? He's got this, through $500,000 job, all these things. But it sounds like, in a similar story for me, where you worked at it, you saved that little bit, you started small, then you started again getting into the bigger cards. But for you, like you've said, it's out of the enjoyment, out of the I want to own this, not the fact that you want to buy and then sell it, which is again different than some people you see, but that's what you've enjoyed. Did I miss anything there? Is that pretty accurate? Did I highlight everything there?
It is. I mean, I used to be, the person that would flip cards and prospect a lot. I used to set up at a lot of shows when I lived in the Midwest. It made it a lot easier. I, was stationed in Omaha, Nebraska, so I'd go to Chicago shows, and this is the very late '90s into the very early 2000s. I used to bust a lot of wax back when it was more affordable, but it was like this, just a vicious cycle because I would bust a ton. I mean, to the point of when I got stationed, when I went from Omaha to Idaho, the card shop owner was closing down because myself and another person were, kind of, the other guy, I guess, was getting out of the hobby. I was just getting stationed elsewhere. And so, yeah, it was pretty bad, but I would open a lot of stuff, set up at shows, move it. I'd bulk sell. This time around, it's a lot different. It's, when I set up at shows, yeah, I put out a lot of what I own and not necessarily looking to move it. So that's, it's one of those where people are like, yeah, don't put out cards that you don't want to sell. But, for me, sometimes I think about, well, if I can find the right thing, or if I've got the capital to utilize it. But then, in some cases I get stuck, with, hey, I've got capital and nothing to buy. So, and I think about cards like, like the 24 karat, the Peyton or PMG, those are cards I tried picking up. I was underbidder a few times on the 24 karat Peyton, which really pissed me off. But, that's just, that was led to because I, had funds in hand from making, different moves and selling things. So I'm more of a, I wouldn't say it's reactionary. I, do things as they come. If I've got to, buy, if I came across a good deal on something, yeah, I would, figure it out. I'm pretty conservative, outside of it. Like you mentioned, I don't make anywhere near $500,000 a year.
But the reason I say
middle
that
class
like,
dude.
yeah, middle class dude. There you go. No, that's why I want to say that too, though, because again, I just remember starting and I seeing these pages and these guys, not specifically pointing out you, but just in general, like that's a $50,000 card, that's a $5,000. Like, how does this happen? And that's partially why I want to make this, just kind of hear the stories. And I appreciate you sharing yours there, how you've kind of evolved. One of the things I want to dive in on, I mentioned at the beginning, you talked about prospecting right away. Then you moved into more of the Hall of Fame type of players. I have some stats I'm going to read off, and then I want you to just tell me what you think about what I'm about to say. So, so I use Card Ladder for this, so shout out to them.
Yep.
So Joe Montana, the obviously well-known 4-0 in the Super Bowls, Hall of Famer, top 2 quarterback all time for sure. Maybe no, that's offensive. Peyton Manning's up there. Sorry.
No, Montana. So I'm a Montana guy first.
Okay.
As a kid, Montana was my guy. So
I love Manning. I would also say Montana's too.
Yeah.
So his highest sale ever is $114,000. It's his rookie tops PSA 10 from 2022. Again, some of these stats might be inaccurate, but this is
that one's an 81.
81. Sorry.
Yeah.
Did I say 82?
You said 2022.
Oh, no. Sorry. I was reading what year it sold.
2020.
Sorry.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. And then, so that one is 114,000. Peyton Manning, the highest that I can see is 72,000. The Contenders rookie ticket, PSA 10. Josh Allen has a $288,000 NTRPA out of 10, not the one of one, that happened in 2022. He also has 13 total sales higher than Joe Montana and Peyton Manning's highest. So we're talking, that's not just one sale. There's been 13 higher than 114,000. Trey Lance has a $132,000 sale, higher than Joe Montana. And Justin Herbert has a $1.8 million sale for an NT Shield 1 of 1. And his Prism Finite also sold for $1.1 million. He has 24 sales over Joe Montana. These are just 3 players. I think if I thought of any of these young guys, these stats would have been the same. So with those stats in mind, we have, football coming up. I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot of these young guys again.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, knowing these price points and I guess how high these are, does it concern you hearing these numbers compared to a Joe Montana, Peyton Manning?
It does, because the likelihood of them ending up with the same accolades is pretty tough. Going back to, again, I'm thinking when I talked to Brett, I brought up Phillip Rivers and Matt Ryan, right? Guys that put up phenomenal numbers, but never, won a ring, and, will be in the Hall of Fame. But, look at where their, cards are, now they're rookie cards. Or even look at Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford had the hype, the year that they won the Super Bowl, and his, cards have cratered. So, if something doesn't happen here soon for some of those guys, yeah, I don't see, a good ending for most of them. I mean, they still may be worth a decent amount of money, but nowhere near the top. I mean, it could be the top was in when those purchases were made, just because it seems like the football market has, in most the ultra modern markets have taken a dip here in the last several months. And as I say that, I know players are up. I know Trevor Lawrence, who I mean, I like. He's got kind of the Peyton Manning mold. But I see these tier 3 and 4 guys. I remember getting asked last year who I thought was a bad buy, and I said Davis Mills, and the person looked at me like I was crazy. And it's just knowing that a lot of these QBs are not going to pan out. So it's the prospecting hot potato. It's been going on for, gosh, I mean, 30 years, more than that. I mean, I remember as a kid, like 87 Tops baseball, you bought and sold guys, that are absolutely, they're major league players. So, give it to that. But, they're garbage, had a pedestrian type career. And that's what I can see is, some of those guys are going to be, your Matt Ryans, your Phillip Rivers, put anybody else in there that had a maybe, I feel like I'm picking on Brett because I'm just going to keep naming a cold score. Andrew Luck, right? Look at what happened there. I mean, people got absolutely destroyed when, he, retired early. But, put anybody in there that has 0 rings. Dan Marino, I mean, that's another one. And granted, he's got a good following, but, his prices would be, I would think, significantly more if he had at least one Super Bowl. Jim Kelly, another one. So that's who those guys, if they had those careers, if you're buying them their rookie year, you would say, yeah, that'd be awesome. But, we're baking on a lot of, MVPs and Super Bowls that it's just not going to, I don't think it'll happen, because all these teams' windows will shrink as far as, winning a Super Bowl. It's typically when the quarterback is, in a rookie if they've got a good team, a good surrounding team, it's when the quarterback's in a rookie contract. It's like San Francisco right now. I mean, it's like they've got to win now, because they've got all the money into, the skilled, position players on offense, and, all the big defensive players, and they've got cheap quarterbacks.
So part of the thing that kind of to expand on what you said too, part of the thing that concerns me is there's no history, I guess. No, I'll say this. So you said there's been 30 years of prospecting, which is obviously the truth. I think it's probably been around for as long as cards have been around. Everyone wants to, collect cards of players they like watching and hoping they have a good career. I guess what concerns me is like the unprecedented nature of the dollar amount. Like we're talking like, 1.8 million, like I said. So that's not even like saying, oh, if he has the career of Joe Montana, he might get this. Granted, I'll fully acknowledge there are different types of cards. That's what everyone's going to say. They're different types of
Right.
cards. I get that. But what about the 2000s? I know there was one of one shields, right? I mean, I was going to ask you, like, what was it like with the hype, with the prospect, in which some of these guys from the 2000s that, again, there's no argument to be made that it's different because they had the same type of cards. They're still the one of one shields that we're talking about. Like, do you remember some of these players? Can you maybe talk about that just a little bit?
So I remember like Michael Vick. I mean, his cards, but you could buy. I had a buddy. I remember at I think it was the 2002 National. If it was in 02, it was 02 or 03, whichever year it was in Chicago. But I remember he sold a Vic SP Authentic, rookie patch auto, because those were the big things, back then. And, I think it was like $600, and that was a lot of money, back then for a card like that. As far as some of the shields, I don't recall like prices, but I would say it was on such a, smaller scale. I can think of even like '03, '04 exquisite basketball, like LeBron's. Is it the numbers, the one that, whatever one, it's a vertical, it's numbered to 23, not the actual RPA,
Is
but
it
it was one of
notable number? I can't think of
something
it.
like that.
I
Yeah.
think it's that.
That was less than $1,000 card back in after exquisite, came out. And I remember that because I knew a guy when I lived in Omaha that sold the card on eBay, and it went for just under $1,000. So, entry level, I mean, you could say it was high back then, but it's nowhere near now. I mean, there's, to me, a lot more, risk and ruin, or risk or ruin, involved here, that, to me, the people that are dealing in that stratosphere, I mean, they've got to have a ton of money, I would imagine. So, hopefully it's something that, the it's not going to hurt their overall, portfolio, is, so to speak. But yeah, it's a lot crazier when you see guys like Desmond Ritter and Sam Howell, and, last year's guys, Trey Lance, that are selling for, 4 and 5 figures, and knowing that some of these guys are just going to be garbage. I mean, Malik Willis, and I don't know what his stuff was selling for, but I mean, it sounds like he's already, one foot out of the league. But yeah, that's probably the major difference from, 20 years ago to now, is just the entry point for, the top tier players is significantly higher. And then it's even crazier for like your third and fourth tier guys. So I'd call them, yeah, those guys, some of those guys I would call like tier 3, tier 4 types, and you see it in basketball as well, where people are chasing, dudes that I'm like, yeah, you may get lucky and find a Giannis, but, more often than not, you're probably going to get burned, and you're paying a heck of a lot more than somebody was in, 2014 or 2013. Yeah. To buy, Giannis, cards back then. We kind of pivot into, to basketball.
So the reason I wanted to ask about this too is I feel like this is such a hard mold to break when you come in. Like, I just remember, and you kind of sound like it was familiar, where you had those 2 years where it's just like, this is the only hobby you saw was the prospect. Like, that's what I thought it was. It was like, you see the showcase at a show of, 50s baseball, and I'm just like, I don't have no interest in that. And it sounds horrible to say, it's just the truth. When I came in, I think we all have this, like, I want to say like arrogance, but somewhat like naivety, basically, of it. Like, you don't realize that there's this whole other hobby out here. There's like two stratospheres, like you said. It's like the prospecting people who chase, I'd imagine, will obviously probably like watching the players, you'd hope, or they don't care about them, but you chase the money. Or, like you've kind of alluded to, you're chasing the nostalgia and the players who are already established, who have, you want to own the cards, not because they might possibly make memories that you're going to enjoy. It's because they already have, and you've enjoyed it, and you can go back to it. Right. I would assume you'd pay a premium for knowing what they've done, but people currently seem to pay a premium for not knowing what's going to happen, which is very interesting.
It's different. And I was thinking about this earlier today. The other major difference in, so late 90s and early 2000s, is there were so few parallels compared to now. And that's where I would be scared if I was somebody buying prospects, and, let's say within, Prism or Optic or whatever, that have like however many, it's 20 or 30 or God.
I think it's more. I think it's like
Yeah.
60, 60
Yeah.
70.
So, these people are, it's low numbered, but I don't think that stuff is going to stand the test of time. It's going to be, I've talked about this with buddies over the last couple of years. There's going to be certain parallels in those products that will, be the ones that are sought after. But I think some of the oddball ones, now that may go for a decent amount, are not, because it's like there's too much it's saturated. Versus, I know you've been collecting like the finest gold refractors and Topps Chrome gold refractors and those type of things. And back then, the early 2000s, there weren't many parallels. I mean, in finest and Chrome, you had maybe what, 4 or 5,
Yeah.
even less in when they first rolled out. So I think those are the major differences. But I get it. I mean, for people, it makes sense to try to, if you're truly collecting, to collect a player that's currently playing. It keeps you involved, team, that type of thing. It's, for me, I've always kept the teams I've liked, but the sports have changed so much, and that players, jump ship. So like the last big guy I ever collected, and I should have, this is going back to like 2007, was Jeff Francoeur. So I'm a big Braves fan because of Dale Murphy. I decided to collect Francoeur. Why I didn't collect like Peyton Manning or somebody else, I don't know. But I went out to try to get everything. And I had like MLB logo men from, UD Premier and Ginter wood cards. I had all kinds of crazy stuff. And then he got traded to the Mets, and I just, stopped thinking, because it was more about him playing for the Braves and hoping that he had a long-term career. And so that's like the last time I've really tried to play or collect somebody. And it's for that fact that, more often than not, I'm going to like a player, because they play for the team that I, root for. The only exception was Peyton Manning, and that was just its own little, story there on how that worked out.
Amazing. So if you don't mind, I'll shift over to your Mount Rushmore. I think it's like a nice segue because you mentioned Peyton Manning, and I know you have a really phenomenal collection of him, not only, but other players as well. So Adam, obviously, if I just remind you, so this will be on YouTube, but also people on the podcast, they won't be able to see the visual here. So if you could also just describe the card when you go through each one, just to kind of paint a picture of what people are looking at.
Yep.
And feel free, run with this. Your Mount Rushmore. Let's hear about it.
Yep. So the first one on the left is probably the one that will shock most people, but that's a 77 Topps. It's a Dale Murphy rookie. He's on there with Gary Alexander, who I don't think had much of a career. Rick Cerrone was a decent catcher, and Kevin Paisley, I don't think had much of a career either. But when I got into collecting, he was my favorite player. We had moved from Hawaii to Kansas, and my choices were either watching WTBS or WGN. Fortunately, I made the right choice, and it was TBS. Neighbor, kid across the street was a big Braves fan, so just kind of fell into that. But that's, Murph's rookie card is I was probably 11 or 12 years old. I want to say it was either 86 or 87. I got that card for Christmas, and that was like one of the more expensive cards out there. That was roughly like a $50 card at peak. So, for that time frame, a big card. My parents got it for me for Christmas. It's, thought it was the greatest thing. It's still in the same ugly screw down. They probably paid $50 for that card, and it's maybe a PSA 4 or 5 at best. And I actually bought a PSA 9 probably close to 20 years ago, and I sold it. I was just like, yeah, it did nothing for me. But, people talk about, casket cards. That's probably the only one. I'm not going to put some super expensive card in the grave with me. I'll give them to my son if I still own them. But that's the story behind that one. That one is, really a nostalgic, card for me. I still have my Dale Murphy collection from when I was a kid. The next
It's funny. I was just sorry, not to interrupt. I was gonna mention. I'm glad you mentioned the screw down because I had to trim it for the photo, and I was like, you have to get the full visual. It's in a screw down. I mean, this is obviously a childhood card. I love it. Sorry, go ahead.
It is ugly, and I left it that way for that. The next card's a 55 Topps Roberto Clemente. It's a PSA 5. So I've always liked vintage. Just when I grew up as a kid, I mean, I read, a biography on Roberto Clemente, guys like Hank Aaron, Pele, so on and so forth when, I was in elementary school. But Clemente is my dad's favorite player. So my dad's from Western Pennsylvania. I remember at a card show in Wichita, Kansas, I was probably 10 years old, seeing a Clemente there. The guy wanted like $100. A couple years later, we had moved up to North Dakota, so my parents were in the military. And I remember seeing the same card for about $100 over in some small town in Minnesota. So it was always one that I wanted to get. And I ended up picking that one up probably 2 years or so ago. And ironically enough, I didn't realize it until I got the card, but the seller, I bought it on eBay. The seller lived in the same neighborhood I did when I was in South Dakota. So it was the craziest thing. But, for me, it has, again, more of a nostalgic feel to it. I do like vintage. As I mentioned, I have an Aaron rookie. I've got the Clemente, a 51 Mantle, a 52 Mays, a 57 Russell, and there's other guys that I would love to get, but it's all about timing and the willingness to depart with the money to purchase it. So that's another piece going back to my other side. But that's the reason behind that card is, it was my dad's favorite player. I remember sharing it with him, when I finally got it in hand. It's a nice looking, 5 as well. The next one is a PSA 9. It's a 98 Leaf Rookies and Stars Peyton Manning longevity. So those are out of 50. That one's number 14 out of 50. It's not the most expensive Peyton I own. I would say that's probably the Atomic, but it's one. The story behind that is I bought that card as a BGS 9.5 Min Gem, probably whenever PWCC was liquidating the person's collection. That's where I picked up a lot of this stuff. But I picked up that Min Gem. I knew it wasn't a PSA 10. I was in Dallas set up last year and going back to, putting out cards that you don't really want to sell. I had a guy that came up and wanted that. And I had a Super Rave at the time, and I wasn't really keen on the Super Raves. I just don't like the college jersey, and it just kind of clashes with everything else. But I sold that longevity. I regretted it. The card came up on eBay earlier this year, and I was like, I'm going to buy the card. That's the exact card that I own. And now it's in a PSA 9, which I thought was the correct grade. So with 98 Leaf Rookies and Stars, it was the first year that they came out. The longevity is being out of 50. The unique thing is the number 1 is essentially a 1-of-1. So it's a holofoil, and then the other 49 or what this one looks like. And the cool thing is the background is the team logo. I mean, it's a shinier. It's not like, your refractor shine, but it's got a shine to it. And when you tilt it, you can see the logo really well there. So, to me, it's a beautiful card. That's probably why I like it. I don't think it's going to leave this time around. I say that, and I hope, unless I can somehow get the 1 of 50. But to me, Rookies and Stars is probably one of the more underrated sets. As I mentioned in that post, if there had been a basketball product that year, the baseball and the football would be, they would sell for considerably more, because I think the basketball collectors would have fallen in love with those sets. And then the last one. So this was a kind of a toss up between 3 cards. So Joe Montana is my favorite football player. He was as a kid, growing up. And this one is from 2000 Leaf Certified Heritage Collection. It's a patch auto out of 21, and I believe it's number 15 out of 21. But if you flip the card around, and if you go to the post, you'll see it. But if you flip the card around, the cool thing about it is this is back when, Leaf would depict the actual jersey that it came off of. So on the back is a picture of the jersey, and it's signed, and it says 1979 game used. So it's a rookie patch. So technically an RPA, but it's not. It is a rookie patch, and it's an autograph card. But something super rare. There's I know somebody that has, I want to say 2 or 3 of the others, and maybe somebody else that has another one. So they're extremely limited. I think there's a couple unsigned versions. There's a version where he's in his Chiefs uniform, and I thought about buying it. The 15 out of 20, the exact serial number had come up earlier this year, but I just like it for that it's, the lineage to it, if that's the right term, but it's from his rookie year. The other 2 that were real close is I have a 1999 Incredible Ink level 2 that's numbered out of 16. I picked that up in a deal, and I actually picked it up at the National in 2021 in Chicago. But it reminds me, because I used to own the Wilt Chamberlain, the Incredible Ink. I owned it back in 1999. I paid $300 for it, and I sold it for $400. And it's a card I regret to this day to sell. And if I could get the Incredible Ink, I would do anything for the Wilt. Well, except I won't pay the prices that they that they go for now. And then the other one was a from Playoff. It's a auto, and it's a piece of the football from, I believe it was the fourth Super Bowl that they won against Denver. So it's a super rare, card there. I got it graded as a PSA 8. I meant to grade the auto, which is a 10 all day long, but I picked this one out of the three just because it has, roots to his rookie season. But that's the four that I have there, all for very different reasons.
Amazing. I love how it kind of touches on different aspects of your journey, from the childhood card to the Peyton to the Montana and cards even you sold and got back again. Like that's just really unique. Quick question just off this too. I have no knowledge of patch autos for Montana. Do you have not specifically this card, but just like a general sense, what kind of range do these type of cards typically go for? Like, let's say I want to start collecting Montana. What kind of range do these go for?
So some of the cheaper ones, I mean, it depends on the era. I mean, one of the first ones I bought was I think it was an '09 Classics, but that would have been Panini by that point. Um, it really cool piece swatch, but it was a sticker auto. You can get something like that for under $300.
That's just
But
absurd.
yeah,
That just makes that's
but
so absurd. Why do these modern guys come out and their autographs are $2,000 and the supply is going to go up forever? That's
yeah,
just so crazy.
it's the on card thing,
Yeah.
and now with, as with Peyton, a lot of his stuff's player worn, or maybe never worn for all we know. Um, so which is why like the flawless and those types, as long as they're the game used, go for a significant amount. But Montana, his stuff is spiked quite a bit over the last couple of years for the rarer stuff. I mean, I don't mind. I paid. I got lucky. It was that last Montana I forgot to mention was in a PWCC weekly auction. And when I saw it got listed, I probably clicked on that thing over 100 times during the week. I just wanted it to end. I was willing to pay significantly more, but I paid just under like $1,000 for that card.
Oh my gosh,
And
that makes me sick.
I've had somebody offer me like 4 times the amount. It doesn't matter. And so that's the interesting thing, right? I have some cards are more expensive, but stuff like that Montana, there's no interest in selling. I mean, I'm into it for, next to nothing. Now, if I was into it for like maybe $30,000, yeah, I would have to think about it because, that may open, other avenues. But for a card where, I have $1,000 into, which is similar to like the Super Bowl ball auto one that I talked about, and that incredible ink I got for, just a little bit under that. It's, you can offer me. I've had another from Impeccable of his. It's just an auto. It's a Super Bowl auto where he's got the famous like pose where he's got his arms outstretched in the air, and I've got 2 of the 5, and I've had a guy offer me like 5x because he wants it for a set, and I'm just like, I don't want to sell the card. It means more to me. It's not gonna change anything for me, right? I'm going to sell and be like, okay, now what the hell do I do with this money? I can't buy
I
anything.
go
But
buy
yeah,
it back for 3 times the price,
yeah.
right? You go do that
His,
later on.
yeah, his earlier stuff can go for a decent amount though.
Mhm.
Like the dual autos with him and Rice so he has a master collection,
Okay.
like the Jordan master collection, and there were a few others, the Lakers, but he's got some dual autos out of 10. There's like 5 versions with Jerry Rice, and then there's 5 versions with Ronnie Lott. So there's a total of 50 autos, and then he's got 5 cards, I believe, in a set where there's a piece of it's a game used jersey, and I've got like 2 out of the 5, and those have started to go up. I mean, there's been some graded sales at just over $1,000, but yeah, when you consider that to what guys are going for now, it's pretty crazy. I mean, the unfortunate part, and what took me a long time to collect Montana, is he didn't have a lot of cool player year stuff, right? So, and then it converted to the sticker autos, which aren't as bad. I mean, when they started doing the silver stickers, it and more like playoff, Donruss League playoff, they weren't terrible looking. I don't like the ones that are the silver, like the upper deck silver ones don't, look as nice as the the playoff ones, which were just like a blank silver. But I think that's the big thing with him is, he doesn't have anything, and maybe that deters people because I don't buy a lot of Peyton Manning that's post year, playing stuff. I try to stay, really the early part of the career. So I understand that. And then now Montana signs a million things for Leaf. So, you can, if you want a Montana sticker auto, you can get it, I would assume, for like under $100.
Wow.
My Joe Montana auto search on eBay is just, it's typically a bunch of Leaf cards, and rarely is it anything that is of substance. I mean, there was a 97 Legends. That's a big set, 1997 UD Legends. There was actually a set that sold on Golden here recently, but there were a few cards that didn't pass authenticity, a few of the big short prints, but that's a huge set amongst football collectors from that time. And I'd love to get the Montana, but I ended up like the underbidder. The time the 8-5-10, there was an 8-5-10 and a 9-9 that came up, and the 9-9 actually sold for less. And for me, with those type of cards, it's more about the autograph than the condition. I mean, I don't want like a creased up and crumpled up card, but I want one that has a clean auto. So if I get like a PSA 6 or a BGS 7, as long as the auto's a clean 10, no bubbles or anything like that, that's all that matters to me with those cards.
I appreciate the insight, and like just emphasize too, I don't ask this at all to like hype up Montana, just more so from being the kid who grew up following the NFL, the legends, reading all the books, the rankings. It's like a guy who's 4-0 in Super Bowls and then is quote unquote, again, not officially, but like rookie RPA for under 1,000. Like it's just crazy to me. But that's okay. That's how the hobby is, and it's just interesting too. I don't know basketball well enough, but I'd have to imagine some of these basketball legends of similar cards are much more. So it's just kind of crazy. But like you said, I'm sure some part of it is the I don't want to say like unknown, but the difference for Montana. It's hard for me as someone who only knows so far Panini stuff. Now I'm in the 2000s, maybe shift to the 90s a little bit. It's like Montana's way still the hell out in the outfield. I'm not, it's like, I think there's something to that. I just want to say, I think there is something to that, and it's too bad, really.
Yeah. If you have ties, I mean, like I said, the vintage stuff is because that was something, I was into at a younger age. And maybe that was because of my dad, even though he wasn't buying vintage cards. When I was a kid, he kind of collected like 88 Fleers. We'd put together sets, or 86 Donruss chasing the Jose Canseco. But I think it was, reading and knowing about the history of baseball in particular. And that just led to, the other sports. I've always kind of been somewhat of a, sports historian, across the board there. But I mean, maybe you'll eventually get into it, but I know somebody had
I
a
hope
question.
to. I definitely hope to. I should have said that. I made it sound like he's like way out there and I have no interest. I greatly have interest because I'm a kind of, I'm not say full on historian, but like NFL history means a lot to me. So, and Montana is obviously massive, massive for that.
And it's hard. I mean, you don't want to get too, spread too thin. And that's why I kind of focus, it's Montana and Manning and, certain, vintage cards is primarily what I buy. So that's what makes, card shows somewhat boring for me. Is especially if I'm attending like the National this year, it's probably going to be like AC last year, and I'll be fine if I go there and I don't buy a thing and I don't sell a thing. It's more about, hanging out with people that I've met through the hobby. That's what it's turned into, for me this year. I'll be there Wednesday afternoon and heading out Saturday at noon. So it's going to be a little bit shorter than years past, but, I'll have gotten my fill of it all, in between, and, meeting, catching up with people and all that good stuff.
You and I have the same schedule. We'll definitely have to meet up. That'd be
Yeah.
great. So if you don't mind, we wrap up with like a fast 5? It's kind of 5 quick questions. First thing that comes to your head, maybe some tricky, some not. So if you could only collect patches, so we're talking game used patches or on card autographs, one or the other, no duplicates. What are you taking?
Man, I know you mentioned this before. I'd probably take the autos.
Okay.
I know the patches are cool. I mean, obviously the best combos both, but yeah, I'd take the autos. mean a little more to me. The person took the time to sign it, so, and I've got some like auto memorabilia. Yeah, it'd be autos.
You mean you don't want like the armpit sweat and the blood? That doesn't mean anything to you, Adam?
I mean, that would be cool. It'd be unique, right? But I'd say I'll take a Joe Montana, Jerry Rice dual auto over dual patches of them any day of the week.
So then another one here. So where is your favorite place you've lived while in the military? Because I heard you kind of say a few different spots. What's your favorite spot? Maybe the fondest memories.
So I would probably say, and this is going to shock people, but North Dakota. And I say that because we moved there when I was in 6th grade and I graduated high school there. So, it's probably the most memories, friends and those type of things. Yeah, even more so because I joined the military after, and I've lived in so I was assigned in several different states, but I would say North Dakota, because of the people and time in life.
What do you call a North Dakota person? Like, I'm a Wisconsinite. What is a North Dakota person?
Must be like a North Dakotan or something like that. I have no idea, man. And the thing is, I haven't been back there since like 1995. When my parents retired from the military, they moved to Eastern Tennessee, and that was I went and visited them that last winter and hung out with my buddies, and that was it for me. I have no real desire to go up there other than, well, I guess I shouldn't say that. I wouldn't mind seeing what the town or the city looks like now, but yeah, wouldn't want to stay for more than a day.
Thanks for sharing. So then another one here, if you could only collect 1 year of cards, it could be all the sets, all the sports in that year. What year would you do? Last episode, Chris Dicia had some really good ones. He said 97 for the, PMGs and stuff. And then he said 2012 for like the Fleer Retro. You got the first year Prism, stuff like that. Is there a year that you'd like?
So I would probably say, man, that's a tough one.
It is. That's why I gave a couple examples, because his blew me away.
For more modern, I would say 99, just because that would include some Montana stuff. I was initially going to say 98 because that would hit me with all the Peyton rookies, which is what, most of the Mannings I own are. But 99 would let me get a hold of some cool Manning parallels, and then also, a couple of the rarer Montana autos. And then if it were vintage, which is the other side, and so I did listen to that one. I listened to it today, so I knew that you'd ask that. The other one would be 57 tops, and I don't really have, outside of the Bill Russell, anything, but I say that because I believe that was the first year that they had all 4 sports. So baseball, basketball, football, and hockey. And football is kind of cool because you've got Unitas and Bart Starr and, several other rookies in there. Baseball, you still have all the Hall of Famers in there. And I want to say 58's Frank Robinson. There's a couple rookies I can't think of off the top of my head. And then if you're a hockey collector, you got 57, hockey. So I would pick that one just for that. You could get a little bit wider there, from a vintage standpoint.
Love it. So then, so we're getting to the retirement for you. Let's just say, hypothetically, pretending it's next year. Where are you living? Are you staying where you're at? Do you have a dream? What's the dream destination? How about that? Man, irregardless of cost of living, where are you going?
So it's not here. I've lived in the Atlanta suburbs for about 11 years. It's just, nice people, nice neighbors, but I don't really care for the weather. It gets too humid. So some of my buddies would not be, it'd either be Vegas or just traveling abroad. I mean, I read a lot, or I shouldn't say read, I watch a lot about like people that slow travel the world. And that goes into the whole financial independence thing, spending a couple months here, a couple months there, because it's cheaper than living in the United States. You can probably get, just as good or better healthcare. So it's one of those two. Probably because of my wife, it'll be somewhere stateside, but it would be Vegas because I would like fit everything I need. Just no state tax. I could gamble.
Hashtag poker, a little bit of poker.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, it would probably be playing. Yeah, that would eat up some of my time and maybe be like a bit of a side hustle there. So yeah, one of those two.
There you go. And then a final one here. So you're on the podcast. Hopefully, a lot of listeners here. What's a card you're looking for that we can help you with? And that's also a tough one. I get that.
No, I had. Oh man. Okay, so I would say one that I haven't seen is a 2005. I think it's Sweet Spot Dale Murphy. So there's jumbo patches that were in that year. I think it's Sweet Spot Classic. The Dale Murphy is out of like 34 or 36, and there has not been one, at least per card ladder, I want to say since like 2014. So that one, just because I have not seen the card. I know 04 Ultimate has has or had a lot of them. I've got a DiMaggio from the set where he's like in an Oakland A's, but that would probably be the one, just because I literally have not seen that card in years. So yeah, outside the box, it's not Peyton or it was going to be a Montana probably, but the Murphy is the one that I would like to see and probably pay dearly for.
Hey, you got to shoot your shot.
Yeah.
So thanks so much, Adam. I appreciate you joining. This was really fun. As you can see, we've almost talked for close to an hour. I didn't even see the time, but I hope that's okay with your schedule. So you can find Adam on Instagram with his, his username in the bio of the video or podcast episode. And Adam, I hope we can meet up at the National. It'd be a lot of fun.
Likewise, man. Thanks for having me on, Austin. And yeah, we'll definitely meet up.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Take it easy.